The transatlantic slave trade was one of the greatest forced migrations in human history, with devastating consequences for West Africa and enduring effects on the modern world. The transatlantic slave trade operated for about 400 years, from the mid-15th century to the mid-19th century. An estimated 12.5 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, about 10.7 million survived the Middle Passage. The peak period was the 18th century. Brazil received the largest number, about 4.9 million. The Caribbean received about 4.7 million. North America received about 400,000, but their descendants now number over 40 million. Nigeria and present-day West Africa supplied a substantial proportion of those enslaved. 4 main causes. Labor demand. The colonization of the Americas required massive agricultural labor, sugar, tobacco, cotton, rice. Indigenous American labor had collapsed due to disease. African labor, already practiced in internal African slavery, was commercially available. European demand. European capitalists, merchants, and plantation owners sought profits. African supply. African states and merchants participated, some kings sold prisoners of war and criminals, others raided for captives. Racism. European rationalization of African inferiority made the trade psychologically and politically possible in European societies. The Middle Passage was the sea crossing from Africa to the Americas. Enslaved people were packed into ships in horrific conditions, forced to lie in rows in holds with no room to sit upright, often chained. Mortality during the crossing averaged 10 to 20%. Causes of death: disease, especially dysentery and smallpox, dehydration, despair. Some enslaved people jumped overboard. The Somme Massacre of 1781, the crew of a British slave ship threw 133 enslaved Africans overboard alive to claim insurance. This event became a major cause in the British abolitionist movement. Effects on West Africa. Demographic. The loss of 12 to 15 million people, mostly young men and women, over 4 centuries caused significant population decline and gender imbalances in affected regions. Political. African states that participated in the slave trade became dependent on European trade goods, firearms, alcohol, cloth. Wars were increasingly fought to capture slaves for trade, destabilizing interior regions. Social. The slave trade spread violence, insecurity, and social breakdown across West Africa. Economic. The export of human beings instead of goods prevented the development of an industrial economy in West Africa. The abolition movement grew in Britain from the late 18th century. Key figures: Oloda Equiano, an Igbo man enslaved and later freed who wrote a hugely influential autobiography. William Wilberforce, British parliamentarian who campaigned for abolition. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833. The Royal Navy then patrolled West African waters to suppress the slave trade, a patrol that inadvertently brought British ships into increasing contact with West Africa and contributed to later colonialism. The Atlantic slave trade finally ended only in the 1860s when Brazil stopped importing enslaved Africans. Transatlantic slave trade, 400 years, 12.5 million transported, 10.7 million survived Middle Passage. Causes: labor demand in Americas, European demand for profit, African state participation, racism. Middle Passage, horrific conditions, 10 to 20% mortality, Somme Massacre 1781. Effects on Africa, demographic loss, political destabilization, spread of warfare, economic underdevelopment. Abolition. Equiano's autobiography, Wilberforce in Parliament, Britain abolished trade 1807, slavery 1833. This is Light Tech Academy, quality education for every Nigerian student.